Hello again, everybody, and welcome to CaneSport's Countdown to Kickoff as the Miami Hurricanes prepare to travel to one of their favorite venues in all of ACC and college football, and that is Blacksburg, Virginia, where they get to meet up once again with the Virginia Tech Hokies in a noon game on Saturday that now has been moved to ESPN from ESPN2. I'm Gary Ferman, the publisher of CaneSport.com, and I'm joined, as I am every year at this time, by Tim Sullivan of HokieHaven.com, who is going to give us some insight into this 4-3 Virginia Tech team that, I guess the best way to put it, is absolutely reeling a little bit because of what happened last Saturday up there in Blacksburg when they dropped a 38-35 game to Liberty, a team that I would describe as probably the surprise outfit of college football this year, but probably one that the people in Blacksburg feel pretty strongly that Virginia Tech should still be able to beat. And it was a tight game right down to the finish, and Liberty lines up for a 59-yard field goal at the end of the game, and head coach Justin Fuente decides that he's going to freeze the kicker, and just as the kick is blocked, he's calling timeout, and it gets waved off, and Liberty ends up going for it and getting the first down, and then kicking a game-winning 51-yard field goal to give Virginia Tech the loss. And Tim, welcome to CaneSport's Countdown to Kickoff, and from what we understand, that did not go over very well in Blacksburg, and it's going to be a pretty ornery crew of people that the Hurricanes are going to meet up with up there when they get to Blacksburg, and probably an ornery football team as well. Fill us in on just what the atmosphere is around town these days after that loss, and I understand that people are not very happy with Justin Fuente.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a game that, on the balance of play, probably the Hokies deserved to lose. But when you look at the way the end of the game played out, just significant game mismanagement problems. And frankly, when you look at a lot of the losses over the past 4 years, it's probably been a theme of them is either the Hokies didn't really stand a chance, or the game was mismanaged in a way that a team that had the right kind of game management probably would have been able to win a lot of those games. So certainly that has a lot of fans kind of wondering whether Justin Fuente is the right guy for the future. I don't think it's likely that you see a coaching change anytime soon, but for the time being, a lot of the goodwill that he had built up over his first couple of years is really starting to dwindle.
Well, they kind of like were in a similar state, I guess, last year when they came to Miami, and they ended up pulling off an upset of the Hurricanes, and it's been kind of like that way for Virginia Tech football for a few years now. It's like ups and downs, and you don't really quite know what you're going to get week to week. Looking at this season, they played North Carolina tough. They lost 56-45, but they beat Louisville relatively, 42-35. I'm not going to say it was easy, but they did beat Louisville, and then they beat what Miami found out to be a pretty competitive NC State team, 45-24. They beat Duke 38-31. Probably not the greatest margin of victory considering how bad Duke seems to be this year. And to me, their most impressive victory might have been the win over Boston College, which has been one of the surprise teams in the ACC this year and has been playing really, really, really good football. So they're a 2-point favorite in this game against Miami, and I think Miami goes up there not really quite knowing what it's really going to get from Virginia Tech. We're used to seeing a program built around a Bud Foster defense. Well, Bud Foster's not there anymore. He's retired, and the defense has been absolutely horrendous this year. And instead, the program's being propped up by what has been a decent offense and a quarterback by the name of Hendon Hooker, who, we're not going to say he's Michael Vick or anything like that at this point, but a pretty darn good talent who's made them a relatively high-powered offense. But then if you add in the factor now that they might be without their best running back, that's an iffy situation we'll ask you about here in a minute. And I think Miami just makes the trip not really knowing what it's going to get from Virginia Tech. And my guess, Tim, is that Virginia Tech doesn't know what it's going to get from Virginia Tech.
Yeah, exactly. You're saying Miami doesn't know what to expect, and I think you're exactly right in saying that the Hokies kind of feel the same way. It's been since a couple good games to open the year, it's kind of been back and forth each week. So on that basis, maybe this is one of the weeks that you get a slightly better version of Virginia Tech. But like you mentioned, the defense has really been hit hard in terms of graduation, in terms of players opting out for the season, and in terms of guys having to quarantine after coronavirus and contact tracing protocols. So early in the year, things were pretty rough on the defense, and lately they've gotten a lot of those players back, but you haven't seen the requisite improvement from the defense that you might have expected when you do have that improvement in your personnel. So it has been the offense, and now that Hendon Hooker is fully healthy, he missed the first couple games with injury, unrelated to the pandemic, but did not start the third game. That was the game against North Carolina. Quarterback Braxton Burmeister was really rough in that game. Hooker was healthy enough to go in and replace him, and once Hooker went in, the offense got a lot better, and the offense has been extremely smooth. Other than some hiccups against Wake Forest, it's been extremely smooth ever since. But the defense has been a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde situation on that side of the ball with personnel that's just not quite up to the standard that you've come to expect from Virginia Tech. And I think the coaches would love to have some sort of magic wand, or maybe some sort of way to know what they're going to get for a given week, and that would kind of allow them to adjust accordingly. But just like Canes fans, when they watch the game in Blacksburg, I think even the Hokie fans kind of feel the same way. They don't quite know what they're going to get until kickoff.
Why the defensive drop-off? Is it all the absence of Bud Foster? Has recruiting slipped in the last few years? Why is Virginia Tech not playing Virginia Tech defense?
I think a big part of it is the personnel, and that actually goes back to the era. You can go all the way back to when Frank Beamer was still around, his final recruiting class, and then defensively, Bud Foster was essentially the head coach for defense the past 4 years, and they weren't really doing a good job managing the roster to make sure that they had a nice balance of upperclassmen and underclassmen over the course of his final couple years. It kind of faded off in terms of that and in terms of recruiting, so they don't have the talent that they've usually had. They've really had to build. It's a pretty young defense that's had to build through the last couple recruiting classes, and when you look at a team that kind of has been built upon not necessarily the most complex schemes, but upon having guys who are ready to play, there just aren't enough of those. And quite honestly, there isn't enough top-end talent on this defense like you've come to expect over the years. There's no Kendall Fuller out there. There's no, some of these guys that have excelled over the years. Darryl Tapp is there, but that's because he's a coach, not a defensive lineman. They'd love to have a player like that, and they just don't have the same level of talent that you've had over the years. And I think that's a big part of it, and it's something that goes back to the previous coaching staff, but at the same time, you're in year 5 of the current coaching staff. There has to be accountability there in terms of building the roster the right way as well.
All right, let's dive into it a little bit, and I'm going to start with the offense because that's the happy side of the football, and I don't want to get you in too sour of a mood here so early in the show. Let's talk about offense first. A unit that's averaging 37.3 points a game, 465 yards. They've been running the ball really, really well. Basically a 2-to-1 ratio, run the pass. I guess it's ranked fifth in the country, and first among Power 5 teams with 279 yards per game. All right, so they can run the football, but the top running back, Khalil Herbert, who has 803 yards so far this season, I guess he pulled a hamstring on the opening kickoff against Liberty. What's the status of Herbert, and is he expected to play this weekend?
Yeah, Justin Fuente has been very mum on the topic this week, which obviously you would take to not bode very well. If Herbert was completely healthy, I think you'd see Justin Fuente saying, yeah, we're not worried about it. That kid's going to play. So I don't know that he's going to be completely out, but there's a pretty good likelihood that he's limited. And we saw against Liberty over the weekend that if Herbert's not there, there are some okay running backs, but the run game has to go through Hendon Hooker if that's the case. And they would really prefer not to run their quarterback 20 times a game like they did last weekend. So Herbert's presence is important, and I think they're going to, at this point, keep it quiet until kickoff about whether or not Herbert's going to be available. If he is, it's a huge boost to this offense.
How bad did the injury look when you saw when it happened?
It's been something that he's kind of been carrying, and he's been playing and excelling through it. And it just was a tweak on a kickoff. He ran and then got tackled and got up and just never came back in the game. It didn't take them long to say he was out for the rest of the afternoon, so clearly they knew it was significant enough. But from the observer's eye, there wasn't a whole lot to it. So hamstrings are always a little tricky, but it doesn't seem like it's something that's too significant.
Well, the first question I would ask is, if he was nursing a hamstring for several weeks now, what the heck's he doing on kickoff returns? I mean, sometimes I wonder what these coaches are thinking. And it's like the last thing you want to do is take a running back who's been dealing with a hamstring and put him on kickoff returns where he's extending himself like that, from the get-go, especially at the beginning of a game where he's not loose and that, I don't know. I mean, I obviously don't know the ins and outs of the injury, but that seems a little bit of a suspect decision by the coaching staff. But obviously, if he is in the game, he is a difference maker, and that's something that Miami would have to deal with. Now, if he's not in the game, then we're going to see a lot of Raheem Blackshear, I would imagine, but doesn't have much. That extensive of a resume. I guess he has 254 yards this season. He does average 4.2 yards a carry, but there's a big difference, Tim, between 4.2 and 8.4. And I got to think Blackshear is a little bit of a drop off for Virginia Tech.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the ways that they've used him, other than against the Liberty when he was essentially the starting running back because Herbert never even came out with the first offense, a lot of the ways that they've used him have been kind of trying to spring him on big games, on end arounds and stuff like that with Herbert still in the game. So it's kind of tough to know if he's used in a traditional kind of running back situation, does the production look a little bit more like Herbert's? Now, obviously, he is not Khalil Herbert. I don't think there's any argument that he can do all the same things that Khalil Herbert can do, but he might be a little closer to it than the numbers seem at this point. And I think it'll be interesting to see if Herbert isn't available, does Blackshear get back to doing a little bit more of that kind of scat back and slot receiver kind of hybrid role while they plug in Jalen Holston as the true running back because he's been injured to start the year. He's just starting to work his way back into the lineup. He's played in the past couple games, but only gotten carries in a few of them. So it's something that if he's healthy, he's kind of more of the Thunder guy, and that might allow Blackshear to be the Lightning, which they're hopeful that he can be a big play threat there. And I think the next big play he hits will probably be only his second or third of the year, but he has that potential because he can be an electric runner in a way that Herbert can't, but he certainly doesn't have the same down-to-down efficiency that Herbert does.
Well, I mentioned earlier Virginia Tech is a favorite in the game, and I have to believe the reason for that, the biggest reason for that, aside from the fact that Miami's going on the road and people are looking at Miami and saying, this is not a 10-win Miami team, and they're going to lose somewhere along the way here down the stretch, at least once or twice, and they're probably trying to figure out where it's going to be. And on the road at Blacksburg is an obvious candidate, so I think people are saying that they're making Virginia Tech a small favorite here. If Virginia Tech is going to be able to pull that off and get it done on Saturday, I don't think there's any question it's going to be because they're able to control the game with the clock and run the football. I can't imagine that they're going to come out thinking that they're going to throw it 40 times against Miami and that's going to get it done for them. They're going to need to be able to run the football. So it's going to be interesting. The thing to watch is Herbert out there at the beginning of the game and what's his availability like? And then if not, can Blackshear carry the load? And do they not have to run Hooker 15, 20 times, which is probably a little more than anybody wants to run their quarterback, although Miami did run De'Ara King 13 times against North Carolina State. So when you look at this, Miami's going to probably score points. I mean, Virginia Tech's defense is struggling. Miami's offense is doing great. 640 yards, I think it was, against NC State last week. De'Ara King is throwing the ball as well as anybody in college football right now. He brings the running threat. They've got 3 running backs that can do damage. It looks like Brevin Jordan will be back at tight end this week to go with Will Mallory, who had 6 catches against NC State. The wide receivers are finally showing up week to week. Mike Harley, Mark Pope are playing their best ball of the season. So the Miami offense has it all rolling. So somehow, some way, Virginia Tech's going to have to find points. It better, for their sake, better come in the running game. Now, if they do throw the ball, Tim, tell us about the wideouts. Trey Turner, Tavion Robinson, the tight end James Mitchell. Can they mount a reasonable passing game?
Yeah, it's really interesting because Hooker is an extremely efficient passer, and he can throw the ball downfield quite a bit. But like you mentioned, if they really try to limit relying upon his arm, and I guess it's fair because in the game that he's thrown most in his career, which is against Wake Forest just a couple weeks ago, he only threw 33 passes. So this is not a guy who's ever going to throw a ton of passes, even mounting a comeback or something like that. So I think when you look at who he's going to throw it to, you mentioned Turner. You also mentioned James Mitchell there. Those are the big two. Mitchell also missed last weekend's game against Liberty. He's probably the prime passing threat, not because he's more capable of big plays than Turner, the wide receiver, but because he's a guy who can do the blocking. He can do the leaking downfield. He can do it all, and that's something that is so important for what this team needs is to kind of take pressure off Hooker by relying upon that tight end a little bit. And that opens up the downfield passing for Turner. He's a true downfield threat. He can make huge plays. It's something that's really important to the way that this offense is supposed to run. And so I think that when you look at, if Hooker puts it in the air a lot, it's going to go a lot to those two guys. Robinson so far has been a little bit more of a screen merchant, maybe a little bit of a guy who leaks up the seam, but not somebody who they're going to use kind of as part of a robust passing game, even though he's now playing a little bit more of a slot receiver and kind of that off-the-line Z receiver role this year as they've kind of expanded his ability. So those are definitely the big three. And then the staff also tries to get guys like Caleb Smith, who's a former walk-on who is actually committed as a scholarship player to Wake Forest. They try to get him involved a little bit. And there are a couple of transfers. Chenga Hodge, who came in from FCS Villanova, where he was a big play threat. He's hardly contributed this year. And then Evan Fairs, who transferred from Kansas. Again, another kid who's barely gotten on the field so far this year. So that's something that I think as the year goes along, they're hoping that those guys can play bigger roles. But so far, they're complementary players at most.
Well, they better hurry up. They're down to 4 games here, so the year has come along. So if guys are going to
they're running out of time.
Yeah, if guys are going to step up, I would think now is the moment. All right, so if we were going to sum it up, the passing game is there to be respected, but at the end of the day, this is an offense that wants to thrive on running the football. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And they do have the ability to go downfield, but I don't know if it's necessarily a confidence thing in the play calling, but they really do prefer to throw when they can make sure that it's in the best situation. They aren't going to kind of force the ball downfield unless they really feel like they are set up to do so, or if they have to.
Well, they've only allowed 12 sacks in 7 games, so that's not terrible. So they're doing a good job, I think, of what you just said in spotting in the passing game at favorable times. So that's a good thing in favor of Virginia Tech's offense. So, I think that they're going to challenge Miami's defense. I don't think there's any question about it. Miami's defense has been up and down. If you look at, if I were going to play Miami's defense, I would want to have a smash mouth kind of team. I mean, and that's what Virginia Tech has. So I think that's a good matchup for Virginia Tech. But the bad matchup is on the other side of the ball. And we talked about how they've been struggling. Has Fuente been tempted to give Bud Foster a call and hey Bud, can you come back as an analyst and help us out or something? I mean, we maybe can use some of your ideas or anything along those lines. Has there been any talk of anything like that?
Well, the interesting thing is that the current defensive coordinator, Justin Hamilton, is a Bud Foster disciple. He played safety under Bud in the early 2000s, so he's a guy who kind of came up in that system. One thing that they've talked about is that Hamilton has tried to make things a little bit more complex with more complex calls. And I think especially given the fact that they've had guys in and out of practice, they've had a bunch of guys who they were expecting before the year who aren't available, including projected first-round pick Caleb Farley at cornerback. I think they're planning to simplify things just a little bit just to kind of maybe get through this year and then maybe install more of that playbook next year. But with the practice reps that you get, unfortunately in this season, unlike any other, it hasn't really worked out the way that they want to try to kind of add some bells and whistles to what they've done over the years.
Well, Miami's running backs are exceptional, but they haven't really been getting to eat a lot the last few weeks, and it's been weird because they had a lot of success early in the year, and against Pitt, Virginia, and NC State, they haven't had their way the way they did earlier in the year, and I'm sure that Rhett Lashley, the offensive coordinator, is very anxious to get his running game going again, and I think this is the weekend and that we're going to see that, and here's why. You look back at the North Carolina game where UNC, they had the 656 yards of offense, which I think Miami's capable of something like that on Saturday. But they had a pair of backs combined for 384 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns on just 37 attempts. So they were getting 10 yards a carry. They scored 4 touchdowns, and Virginia Tech just could not stop the run. And it's one of the worst lines in the country at stopping the run, with opponents averaging 5.2 yards an attempt. And Liberty quarterback Malik Willis last week had 128 yards on 19 attempts last weekend. So I think that's proof that in addition to running backs being able to get large chunks of yardage, that mobile quarterbacks also cause them a lot of issues. So safe to say that Virginia Tech is struggling up front?
Yeah, you nailed it there, especially talking about Malik Willis and how that kind of indicates the potential for success that the Eric King will have this weekend, because Willis was just unstoppable for the Hokies this past weekend. And honestly, there wasn't a lot of complicated stuff in it. The Hokies just didn't have the horses up front that both the traditional running back run and kind of the read that comes off of that running back run. Their linebacker play has been really poor for the past few years, honestly, and that's, I think, part of why, while they do miss Bud Foster, it seemed like he had kind of lost his touch with coaching up the position, and it's definitely come home to roost this year. Dax Hollifield and Alan Tisdale played almost the entirety of last weekend's game after Rayshard Ashby was injured in the first quarter. This is a guy who should have been a first-team All-ACC player last year. Kind of got the snub, even though he was the ACC linebacker of the week for more than half the season. So without him, they were even worse than you usually see. And it's been a really tough time, especially at the linebacker level. But the defensive line isn't doing them a ton of favors. The secondary has dealt with a ton of injuries, and so they aren't making those tackles, 7 to 10 yards downfield. They're making them 20 to 25 yards downfield. And when you add it all up, it's easy. It's too easy to pop big plays against this Hokies run defense, and that's just something that was almost unfathomable in years past.
The linebackers were believed to be the strength of the defense coming into the season from, what we're hearing, and they just haven't been able to make any game-changing plays. A lot of tackling issues. What's broken down there?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is that Ashby has been in and out of the lineup a little bit, because he's an elite linebacker. Dax Hollifield, who is a third-year returning starter, quite honestly just has not lived up to the hype. He looks better when he's playing next to Ashby, but for 3 years he hasn't been able to make a clean tackle, I don't think. And especially against Liberty, his run fits and his reads in the run game were like jaw-dropping for a guy who's a third-year starter. They have tried to shuffle him out of the lineup in past games, but with Ashby injured, they really didn't have that opportunity last weekend. So really it comes down to whether or not Ashby is available. He's expected to be available, but like with Khalil Herbert and like with James Mitchell, Justin Fuentes stayed mum on the topic. So we'll see if he's actually available. If Ashby's there, the quality against the run is a lot higher. It's still not up to the historical standard of Virginia Tech, but the difference between Ashby being there and Ashby not being there is just massive for this team.
Well, you're talking about Rayshard Ashby, who has 39 tackles, six and a half of them for losses, with 3 sacks. So, decent stats, not earth-shattering or anything like that. But, Hollifield has 30 tackles, which isn't that far behind. But the one thing that stood out to me as I took a look at Virginia Tech was that he only has a half tackle for loss in 7 games now. So that's not great. And I think that, when you're looking for evidence of a struggling front seven, you see it all over the place. So if you're going to struggle up front in your front seven and you're not going to be able to stop the run very well, you better be able to defend the pass. But again, uncharacteristically, and I'm stunned to be saying this about a Virginia Tech defense, the DBs have not exactly.
Why the defense isn't very good, huh?
I mean, you got to understand. I've been watching Miami and Virginia Tech play for 40 years now. I mean, and like they used to, we're used to an ep battle, some of the best competition that you see all year and all that. I'm not used to this. I'm not used to seeing this. And then the fact that Virginia Tech is favored in this game is even more startling when you start digging deep into this. But the DBs have allowed an average of 257.9 yards through the air, with opposing quarterbacks hitting on 62.2% of their throws and 13 touchdowns in the 7 games. So a lot of inconsistent hit or miss play in the secondary as well.
Yeah, a big part of it is the secondary was hardest hit by their coronavirus and their contact tracing protocols at the beginning of the year. Cornerback Jermaine Waller, who's a returning starter, has missed I think 3 games entirely and was very limited in 2 more. So it's something that that's 5 out of 7 games this season. That's most of the year. He has only been okay when he's back. Now his is an arm injury. It's not something related to the virus, but some of these other guys who have been in and out of the lineup have been replaced by true freshman Keontae Jenkins, who started the first couple games at safety. Now, safety Divine Diablo, who I think is a very good player, has returned to the lineup, but he has not played like he did last year. Some of that is there's less talent around him, but true freshman Dorian Strong, I think, is the one bright spot in the secondary. He's been very good in coverage. It's taken him a little bit of time to kind of step up as a run defender. They call him probably 180 pounds, but he's 160 pounds soaking wet. But he's the guy who's been best in coverage. But when you only have one guy who can truly cover man-to-man and you don't have safeties that can really make life easy in terms of zones, you don't really have the opportunity to shut down opposing passing attacks. There's always somewhere else that they can go. And when you play the type of quarterback that Derek King is, for example, he's probably going to be the best quarterback other than maybe Sam Howell from North Carolina that his team has faced yet this year. It's really something that I think Justin Hamilton is going to be losing sleep over how he's going to scheme against that for sure.
All right, Tim, so we've broken it all down. It's not the prettiest picture in the world for Virginia Tech, let's be honest. And yet they're favored to win the game. So tell us, how does Virginia Tech win this game Saturday?
Yeah, you kind of alluded to some of it earlier. They're really going to want to run the ball and run the ball well, and slow the game down a little bit, take the air out of the game. If it's a 10-possession game for each team rather than a 15 to 20-possession game for each team like we've seen the last couple of weeks, I think they stand a much better chance of winning because they can get 1 or 2 stops against anybody. They can get 1 or 2 stops in 10 possessions, or they can get 1 or 2 stops in 20 possessions. So if the 2 stops that they do end up getting are a greater percentage of the opponent's offense, then it's something that they have a chance to really make up for it on offense. I think they're not going to fail on offense a whole lot as long as they have the opportunity to continue going out there and scoring. So something that they really need to be able to slow down the opponent with pace rather than with actually getting stops on a consistent basis. And I think they have the ability to score with a lot of teams.
This is what I think year 6 for Fuente? Virginia Tech?
This is his 5th year.
5th year? All right.
5.
So let's see. I'm looking now. I guess he's got a 36-22 record there. Are they happy with Justin in Blacksburg?
No, I would say the fan base itself has never really been happy. I think nobody was going to live up to Frank Beamer for them anyway. What's interesting is in his 5 years so far, he still has a much better record than Frank Beamer had in his final 5 years. Even though Frank Beamer's 5th from end year had a BCS bowl game in it, I think fans kind of equate the Frank Beamer era with the entirety of the Frank Beamer era. not realizing that it really tailed off at the end, and that played a role in the beginning of the struggles at the beginning of the Fuente era. At this point, though, 5 years in, the struggles are pretty much all on Fuente, and that's something that I think he understands. I think fans are, being maybe vindicated a little bit about what's going on there, and we'll see. It's kind of a situation where if he wins big, does it even win that many people over in the fan base at this point? You obviously never say never. Wins are wins, but at this point, fans are really starting to grow restless with him for sure.
Well, he parlayed a couple decent seasons at Memphis into this job. Went 10-3 in 2014, 9-3 in 2015, and then year one at Virginia Tech. I'm assuming he inherited a decent program at that point and goes 10-4. But there's been a steady decline, since then. They went 9-4 in 2017, 6-7 in 2018. Improved to 8-5 last year, largely because of their ability to come to Hard Rock Stadium and beat Miami, which was a huge victory for them. And then, like we said, 4-3 so far this year. So this is a big game for Virginia Tech on Saturday. You said you don't see them replacing him anytime soon, and maybe 5 years in, it's not quite at that point yet. But I got to think that if this season falls apart and they don't beat Miami on Saturday, and they fall to 4-4, and maybe bounce around and finish 6-5 or something along those lines by the end of the year, that they're going to be getting pretty restless over there at Virginia Tech, and maybe he'll get the opportunity for one more of these, but I got to believe, as somebody on the outside looking in, that they got to be saying, we're not sure anymore whether this guy is going to be able to lead our program back to where we feel Virginia Tech football should be. So would you agree that the stakes are starting to get pretty high for the Hokies?
Yeah, I think the Wake Forest game this year, which was the team's second loss, was the one where I really started saying, okay, now he's really starting to lose games that he shouldn't be losing, and there isn't necessarily a good excuse. I think, you mentioned that first year and how maybe he inherited a good program. Well, it was the same team at best that Frank Beamer had taken to 7-6 the year before. So if the players were good, they weren't good under the previous guy. Yet suddenly Fuente was a miracle worker at that time, and then they dealt with a ton of injuries at the quarterback position. There were 0 scholarship quarterbacks on the roster when Fuente arrived. He had to recruit a junior college player and an incoming player to really have anybody there. The junior college player left for the NFL after a year, so there was just one scholarship player, and he got hurt in the second game of year 3. So there have been reasons why things haven't necessarily always worked, but at this point, the reasons should have been compensated for by personnel management, by roster management, by better scheming. And I think that I think last year and this year, you're really starting to see, okay, they've had time to ameliorate those really, really significant issues that Frank Beamer left. I think Beamer got out when he did, not only because he was just ready to be done coaching college football, but because of the situation that the roster had gotten into, because of the situation that the program had gotten into. So, when you don't overcome those issues in 5 years, you've probably shown that it's unlikely that you overcome those issues. And I think that now you're really starting to see that this is on Fuente. This isn't shared blame at this point.
He's Tim Sullivan from HokieHaven.com. And Tim, thank you very much for your time, and looking forward to Saturday's game. It should be a lot of offense, a lot of excitement. Noon kickoff, ESPN. So for Tim Sullivan, I'm Gary Ferman. Thank you for joining us on CaneSports Countdown to Kickoff. We'll catch you next time, everybody.